Welcome to EIU's monthly Global Outlook video, where we discuss trends that are impacting the global economy. My name is Barsali Bhattacharya. I am Deputy Director of Industry Research at the EIU.
And I'm Matthew Oxenford, EIU's lead analyst for climate and sustainability. This month, we're diving into the impact of recent elections across 6 G20 economies and what they're going to mean for climate policy globally.
2024 is an important year for global policies and politics. About half of the world's population is voting in elections this year. Within just 6 weeks, 6 of the G20 economies have announced major election results. So today, let's talk through some of these election outcomes and what they might mean for climate policy.
Sure, Barsali. So just to provide an overview, the elections in the last 2 months included South Africa on May 29th, India with results announced on June 1st, Mexico on June 2nd, the European Parliament elections on June 9th, the UK general election on July 4th, and the French parliamentary elections, which concluded on July 7th. Although energy and climate issues weren't usually top priorities for voters in most of these elections, taken together, the sum of all of these elections is going to have significant impact on global climate policy. So over the next few minutes, we're going to go through the results of these elections and discuss what their implications are going to be on the green transition.
So let's start with the first one, South Africa, where the African National Congress faced a bit of an electoral setback. So they are now going to be leading a coalition government instead of enjoying the majority that they previously held. Now, on the energy front, South Africa has been dealing with frequent power cuts, and reforms to the electricity system is likely to be the main focus for and priority for the government instead of decarbonization. Now, renewables are likely to see an increase in consumption, and the government did reach an international funding deal back in 2022 to phase out coal. But we still expect coal to sort of have an important place, a significant place in the country's energy mix for many years going forward, largely because of the government's priority being ensuring sufficient power availability for the economy.
Sure. And politically, the situation is relatively similar in India, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP lost seats in the election and now governs in coalition, having previously held an overall majority. Despite this, Mr. Modi's climate ambitions are likely to remain largely unchanged, and his climate policies are likely to focus more on growth over decarbonization. India is set to become the country with the biggest increase in total carbon emissions by 2029 at the end of Mr. Modi's next mandate, as China's emissions begin to peak and eventually decline during that period. The Indian government is at that time really planning to increase coal-fired power generation further by up to 80 gigawatts by 2032. That being said, there are some signs of boosting the green economy. The government is still pushing some green initiatives, particularly those to expand rooftop solar, EV charging infrastructure, and also developing new hydrogen development projects, particularly in green and blue hydrogen.
The third economy to see an election was Mexico, where Claudia Sheinbaum won a commanding victory in the presidential elections. Now, Mexico has been a laggard on decarbonization, and it is the largest economy without a formal net zero policy right now. Now, the newly elected president is a former climate scientist, so she's likely to be a lot more receptive to climate action than her predecessor. She has promised significant investment into renewable energy, for example, but it is not going to be an easy transition because of a lot of entrenched factors. For example, the presence and the importance of Pemex, the national oil company. Now, that's going to make any shift in any forward movement with the energy transition a bit challenging for the Mexican government.
Sure. Now, having looked at the three big emerging economies that have had elections in the last 2 months, let's turn to Europe, the region where climate change is likely to be the most significant as a voting issue for most countries. In the European Parliament elections, the coalition of center-right, social democrats, liberals, and the center-right still holds a majority, but far-right parties did gain seats on net, largely at the expense of green parties that promised greater climate action. The EU Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, is still on track to secure a second term, and she may still rely on support from the Greens in supporting her candidacy. But the shift in political attitudes is pushing the EU's energy policy increasingly to the right and increasingly away from ambitious green initiatives. EU energy policy is likely to increasingly prioritize energy security and industrial competitiveness over the green transition or any bold new initiatives. Some existing green initiatives, particularly protectionist initiatives like the CBAM carbon tariff system that's currently being implemented, are likely to still continue and still push forward the green transition, but any overall new ambition is likely to be tempered.
That's interesting, and I guess sort of politically, if you look at all of these elections, the biggest change was probably seen in the UK, where with the new Labour government that has come to power. Now, the Labour Party did promise increased public investment and reforms to accelerate green infrastructure and industry, and that's an interesting contrast to the previous Conservative government under Rishi Sunak, which had softened many of the UK's climate commitments. Now, the Labour won a decisive victory, which offers them a stable political footing, making the UK helping make the UK a more attractive destination for green investment. But as with many other countries, there are going to be significant fiscal constraints that might slow down progress.
Yeah, and sort of rounding out the elections of the last 2 months, we should also turn to France's parliamentary election on July 7th, which produced a very mixed picture for climate policy. The election was inconclusive, with all three of the largest blocs, the leftist New Popular Front, centrist Ensemble, and far-right National Rally, all falling very well short of a majority. This means that any sort of government formation is going to be very difficult, and that means that major policy changes are going to be very unlikely before the next presidential election in 2027. However, with climate change, both the center and left blocs promised expansion of renewable energy investment. And while this is going to be subject to significant fiscal constraints given France's public debt outlook, if a stable government can be formed in any way, this is one of the areas where there's most likely to be consensus.
Thanks, Matt. I guess sort of looking forward, the US election is the biggest question facing global politics. Both parties have drastically opposite approaches towards climate change and climate policy. Now, so far, the Biden administration has pumped in billions of dollars into promoting growth and investment in the renewable sector and has beefed up targets and rules for electricity, as well as EVs. Now, EIU's current forecast is for Donald Trump to win the upcoming election, but it is likely to be a closely fought election, which means there are lots of risks to our forecast. So it is worth looking at how either side is going to approach climate policy. So starting with the Democrats, if a Democratic president wins the upcoming election, we are largely likely to see some amount of policy continuity. And in fact, there might be additional push on the industrial front. So a lot of continuity with the current climate policy in the US. But there are going to be uncertainties if Donald Trump wins. Matt, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The second Trump administration is going to significantly deprioritize climate action compared to the Biden administration. Despite Mr. Trump's threats to repeal the green subsidies passed under the Biden administration, we don't think that there's going to be a full legislative repeal given the amount of investment that the Inflation Reduction Act subsidy program has delivered to Republican-leaning states and Republican-leaning congressional districts. Instead, we think that a Trump administration is more likely to appoint agency heads who are going to be less favorable to climate action. And this is going to create significant policy uncertainty in how those funds are going to be distributed. Additionally, the Trump administration's policies are going to significantly favor fossil fuel energy and discourage the adoption of electric vehicles, slowing down the energy transition. And finally, on the international front, we think that a Trump administration would slow global climate action and stymie any sort of climate diplomacy, given that most countries would be unwilling to step up their own climate initiatives and commit to stronger climate action if the US, the second biggest emitter and largest economy in the world, was opposed to those stronger actions, leading to a slowing of the energy transition globally.
Thank you, Matt. So a lot to really look forward to in sort of the climate policy space as the US election approaches and newly elected governments in different parts of the world start implementing their plans and policies. So EIU will continue to provide detailed analysis on climate policy on the Viewpoint platform. So do look out for those articles and analysis pieces. Thank you for watching this video, and do remember to tune in next month to hear more on EIU's latest insights. Goodbye.